For those of you who don't know me, I'm Amy Smith. I own Amie Bakery up the street. Yay. At the bakery, part of what we do is Amie Academy, and I'm so honored to have Gale Gand here to teach classes. Yes, very, thank you, very honored. Gale and I met several years ago. She was teaching a class at my pastry school, and she is friends with one of my childhood friends as a small world coincidence. So we connected, and over the years, I went to a couple other classes, and then I asked Gale if she would come to Amie Academy and teach. And to have, I call her the legend, at the bakery, Gale is a pastry chef, a chef and co-founder and partner in a Michelin 2-star restaurant, True in Chicago, which after 20 years is closed, but amazing. She hosted Food Network's Sweet Dreams, which can now be viewed on Discovery Channel still. She's baked and known my idol, Julia Child, that I was used to be glued to the TV when I was very little on PBS. My mother would have to drive me away. So to know someone that his name was Julia's an honor. And she makes her own root beer, right? Gale's root beer, which is sold nationally. She's won 2 James Beard Awards. She's been inducted to the American Academy of Chefs and the Chicago Chefs Hall of Fame, and the school in Paris at Brunch. Gale appears at many food and wine festivals across the country. She's a professional pie and food competition judge. You should come to our local chocolate festival.
I'm so there.
Okay. She recently started the Kitchen Sisters Cooking School, a virtual school, and she's a mother of 3, has a BFA from RIT in metalsmithing, and plays the ukulele. 2 things that I was fascinated to learn when I took the first class. So Gale has had a very interesting career, and she's going to talk about that, and she's going to make this amazing Pear Streusel coffee cake, which we'll get to sample afterwards. So without further ado, thank you so much for coming. We're so honored to have you.
Saying to my kids, I gotta go to work, so where's my rolling pin? And I'm probably the only mom in the world who needs a rolling pin to go to work. But I brought this rolling pin with because it's kind of special. This was my great-grandmother's rolling pin. My great-grandma Jenny, who came over from Budapest. When she was getting on the boat, she brought her 3 kids, all the money she had, which was $8.03. And we know this because we can go to the Ellis Island website and look up what ship she was on, who she brought with her, how much money she had, where she said what address she was going to. And this was the 3rd thing she brought, this rolling pin. So it's no surprise that I'm a pastry chef. Of all her belongings that she could bring in her suitcase, this is what she chose. So I like to keep it with me kind of as a little bit of a mascot. I feel like I'm always being watched over by my generations of family. So this went to my great-grandma Jenny, which then went to my grandma Elsie, which then went to my mother Myrna, and then to me, and my kids have used it. So when I was dating my current husband, he asked me, how many pies has this rolling pin made? Which is just, I don't know how to figure that out. But it's 5 generations now of people that have used this rolling pin. And when I was cooking actually in Aspen, at the Aspen Food and Wine Classic, and Julia Child was there to give me my top 10 best new chefs award from Food and Wine magazine, I had my rolling pin with me. I always like to have it around. And I remember as I was checking into the airport to go back home, the guy at the TSA recognized me. He's like, oh my God, you're that pastry chef. You're that girl that does all the desserts. And then he pulled this out of my carry-on luggage and said, you're gonna have to check this. And I said, why? You know what I do. He goes, this could be considered a weapon. And I started to think, maybe that's why Grandma Jenny brought it. Because it's a weapon. So I had to check it. So I don't travel as much with it now because I'm too cheap to pay for checking my luggage. But if I get free check luggage, I will bring it. So we've got it here today, just in honor of great Grandma Jenny. The recipe that we're going to make today is from my Grandma Elsie. So I'm very attached to my family through food. When I'm looking for inspiration or a new recipe, I basically go through my grandma's card file, and I'm not finding a new recipe. I'm finding a very, very old recipe of hers, but they're tried and true. They work, and it's even got like little handwritten notes on the rim to give me some information I might need. So this is one of the recipes that I found in her card file. It's called, it's a Pear Struesel coffee cake. You can also make it with apples. And it's out of my brunch book, which I've got here. If anyone wants to buy one at the end, they're $27.50, 30. It's in the book there, but you've got a copy of the recipe. There is one tiny typo in the version you have. So on the recipe, it calls for 3 tablespoons of butter in the streusel, but down in the instructions, it calls it 2 tablespoons. So I just don't want you to be in the kitchen and be like, Gale, which is it? Which, if you are in the kitchen thinking that, call me, just call me. I'll straighten it out. But just to let you know, it says 2 tablespoons down in the instructions.
And it's supposed to be 3.
And it's supposed to be 3, right? We're going to use it 3. I'm trying to think what else I should tell you before we get started. Oh, I brought my James Beard Award, so you guys could see them. I mean, you can come to James Award. So James Beard is was a cookbook writer. And there's an organization called the James Beard Foundation, and every year they have awards. These are kind of like Oscars in my industry. So I have one for outstanding pastry chef, and actually one for best service in my restaurant True. So this is more my fantastic staff that I had. But I'm happy to pass these around if anybody wants to do selfies with them. That's fine. Just make sure I get them back at the end. But they're an honor, obviously, to have. I remember when I first got my one for pastry chef, and the Beard Awards is like going to the Oscars. There's a red carpet, and you dress up in a formal, and I had like an updo and hair and makeup done. I had like the best underwear I've ever had in my life on underneath. Like I'll never look that good again. So I get my award, I do my million thank yous, I'm crying, and I realize like I better run to the bathroom next to wipe my mascara because there's going to be photos. It's photo op. So I'm running through the lobby. This is at Lincoln Center in New York City. And Bobby Flay stops me in the lobby. And he goes, Gale, we're friends. And he's been on my show and I was on his show. He's like, Gale, do you know what this means? And I said, not exactly. It's like a trick question when someone asks you that. But I'm like, no, what does it mean? And he said, you can double your day rate. So that was apparently what it meant to him. For me, it was just an honor because you're voted on by your peers, but also by journalists. I don't even know who the whole secret, Illuminati is that votes for Beard Awards. I know that I actually do judge the video awards, but I'm not sure who, it's a myriad people that vote on these things. So there's no way to write a thank you note as much as my mother taught me. I always write a thank you note. So for me, it was just a huge honor. And I had them hanging in the restaurant for a long time. And then I thought that's kind of dangerous. Like some disgruntled, not that I have any disgruntled employees, but if I ever had one, maybe they'd like try to take it. I better take them home. So I just had them hanging in my kitchen at home. And I mentioned my husband I was dating. So when we first started living together, he's so cute. He's not in the business at all. He's like a white collar guy. And he comes to me and he says, Gale, maybe we should discuss like who's going to do the cooking and who's going to do the dishes now that we're living together. And I thought, isn't that darling? Like he's pretending he didn't marry me for my cooking skills. It's so cute. And also just to create the fantasy that I could come home and be like, yeah, I'm not cooking dinner, you do it. Like, I don't even, like, how would that work? So, and he's a bad cook. And again, like, you marry me if you were, if you were a good cook, you marry someone. So I'm like, well, I think probably like I should do the cooking and you do the dishes. And he said, he kind of did this like little secret, like, yes. Like evil plot all along. That's that was what he was going for. He was just being nice about it. And so 2 weeks into this, like I'm cooking dinners every night, and he's doing dishes. And finally, after 2 weeks, he comes to me and goes, Gabe, I don't mean to be ungrateful or anything, but I just washed 3 colanders and we didn't even have pasta for dinner. And I had no idea. I use like a ton of dishes. Nick, do you have the same thing? Like you use tasty spoons. Yes, and you use like 5, KitchenAid bowls, and you have no idea because you have a brigade of people that wash dishes for you and return them back like before you even know you use them. So that became his job, poor thing. And then we were having dinner one night and I was making shrimp risotto with peas. So picture that, like this sort of pink shrimp and the green peas. And it's this, creamy, beautiful risotto. I have like one of those hand-painted ceramic bowls that I like to dump it into. And I'm about to stir in the cheese, and I think, no, I'll do it table side. Like when you have a restaurant, if you do anything table side, like sauce something table side or grate cheese, like you can add $4 to it. So I'm like, ooh, make him not sorry that he married me. I'm going to do the parm table side. So I come over with the cheese grater and the big block of parm, Reggiano, like the real thing, and I go to grate it over the top. And he goes, really? Really? Dairy with seafood? He's Sicilian. And I'm like, oh, like, is that a thing? You're Italian? Yeah, and I'm like, so I say, gee, honey, I don't know where your James Beard Awards are, but mine are. So I fall back on the James Beard Awards. Or if you ever questions, like, really, that wine with that glass? I'm like, oh, best service award right here. Yes, sirree. So that's what they're really handy for now. And if I'm like negotiating my price for a consulting job, my husband always tells a story about Shelley Winters apparently was asked to read for the part in the Poseidon Adventure. And she was furious because she already had an Oscar at that point. So she wants the part, so she's going to read for it, but she decides she's going to bring her Oscar in and be like, where do you want me to set my Oscar down before I read for this part? So I always feel like my Beard Awards, like, where should I set my Beard Awards down before we talk about my price? They're fun to have. They're great to have. Let's talk a little bit about brunch because it's my favorite meal, even if you have brunch on Wednesday night. Maybe it's because I missed it so much as a chef, like you're just never there for breakfast. But I love Sunday brunch, Saturday brunch, anytime brunch. Brunch is great because it's super flexible. Like brunch can just be store-bought pastries, and then you throw a cinnamon stick in your coffee filter and make, interesting coffee. Like that's enough. Or if you felt like making something ahead of time, like a strata that you're going to throw together and let soak and you bake off before your guests get there. Even if you bake it off the day before and serve it cold or room temp, like we've all eaten cold quiche and know it's great. So I love that you can serve things any temperature. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't even have to be served. Like you can do a buffet and nobody shames you for that. Versus like the daunting dinner party. Remember those? We used to have those. And you'd have to, you were the chef, you were the dishwasher, you were the waitress, you were like everything, and they go on for, they're 3 or 4 hours long, nobody leaves, everybody gets too drunk, they sleep over. Brunch, people leave, brunch is like an hour and a half. I mean, I don't mean to be rude, and I love my friends, but like, we all have stuff to do, so brunch is like midday, they've got other stuff, they don't drink very much, but like one signature cocktail is fine. And again, all this flexibility, it could even just be, apricot chicken salad sandwiches on little tiny cute rolls. So a lot of flexibility. And this Pear Struesel coffee cake I love to serve because it's better the next day. So if you make it the day before, it gets a chance to the streusel isn't quite as crunchy and it's easier to cut through. So I love things that have do ahead parts to it. So let's go ahead and start making that. I'm just going to do it in I believe is this a 8 by 8 pan? So just any, baking pan you've got. I like to line my pans with parchment paper because the husband does the cleanup and it makes it a little easier for him. And also it's just an easier way to get things out without sort of damaging your pan. So what I like to do is take a piece of parchment paper that's bigger than the pan itself, kind of setting it in the middle. And we're going to cut this paper so that we kind of make tongues that are going to go up the walls of the pan. So the first thing I'm going to do is just draw around the sides of it. with a Sharpie. So you've got this square in there, right? And now there's two ways we can do that. I was explaining to Amy. You can either just cut a slit from this corner right to the corner you've just drawn. So that's sort of the quickest way to do it. So you've got sort of tabs, you can see how that's, and then when we put this into the pan, they'll kind of overlap. Or you can actually like cut the paper out if your OCD is really strong that day, which mine can be. I think, do you have OCD? Can I
A little bit.
survey? I think it's a pastry chef thing. Like, I think that's part of who's in the pastry kitchen is people with wicked OCD, and it appeals to them. So you can also just like cut that little notch out. Now we're going to put this in the pan, and it seems like duh, but the first time I did this, I didn't think to do it. Pencil side down, right? Sharpie side down, because you don't want the Sharpie in your thing. I think I did it on like a meringue thing the first time, and like a pavlova, and I took it off, and oh, there's my line right there. So you can just sort of ease this down in. You don't even have to pre-fold it or butter it to get it to stick or anything. So just kind of ease it down in. For the ones that were just the slits, you just have to decide sort of like who's in back and who's in front. Slide that down in. And that helps, that lines your pan pretty easily now. And if there is sort of a bump or it's coming up a little, once we get the weight of the batter in there, it'll keep it down. So don't worry about that. So that's how you prepare your pan. Now, I love this recipe. It just screams of my grandma. You notice there's no KitchenAid mixer on because who could afford one of those, right? And if you look at the ingredients, there's 1 egg. I just think that's so, like, this is such a depression recipe. Like, my family was so poor, how poor was your family, that when she would make apple strudel, like they couldn't afford apples, they would use cabbage. And it turns out if you put enough sugar and cinnamon on anything, it tastes like apples. So we have this like cabbage strudel recipe in my family that's a dessert. And that's the story, is we were just so poor we couldn't even afford apples. So I love this recipe. It's very minimal ingredients if you look. It's not even a lot of butter. It's 4 tablespoons of butter, an egg, a little bit of milk. But it comes out so great, and it comes out great every time. So let's go ahead and start getting the dry ingredients together. I'm just going to stir it together with a wooden spoon. This is also a great recipe to do with kids. If anybody here cooks with grandchildren or children, it's a great one because there's no machinery involved, and they can just stir it together themselves. When I would demo this at the Botanic Gardens in Chicago, I have twin girls, and I'd be flanked by these 2 little girls, 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old. Then this one got shy, and she doesn't do demos, but Ruby stole my mic every time. But anyway, like I would have my 5-year-old make this recipe, and I would say, my 5-year-old is doing this. What's your excuse for not? Like, she can do this. So I just added the salt. We're going to add some baking powder and some cinnamon and sugar. So anything dry is going in there. We're going to stir that together till it's mixed. Most of the stuff's white. So it's like, how do I know it's mixed? But the cinnamon, we're going to watch the cinnamon. And once we stop seeing streaks of cinnamon, we know the baking powder is also mixed in well, because that's the sort of culprit. You don't want to hit like a pocket of salt, or you don't want to have 1 pocket of baking powder and none in the other side. So if we mix this till we don't see streaks of cinnamon anymore, it's pretty sure that the rest of the stuff is mixed in evenly as well. So that looks good to me. We've got some melted butter, the egg and the milk. So that's going to go in, but before we do that, let's go ahead and get the pear ready. Now this is totally my grandmother. Don't peel the pear. When you bake this up, that peel will get kind of jammy and soft, and you'll almost never even know it's there. What you do want to make sure you do, though, is take the label off. Yeah, again, guess how I learned that? I have this friend, Janine. She's one of those people, like, we go to a restaurant and she always gets the bay leaf or the stick or the label, or God forbid, the Band-Aid, you know, and yeah, in the restaurant business, there's, we don't have regular Band-Aids, we have blue Band-Aids because there's no such thing as blue food. And that way, if you see like blue in your salad, you know it's not, it's a Band-Aid. So we, you know, we wear gloves over it, I know. Fun facts about the restaurant business. So I want to show you what I think is an easier way to core apples and pears. I have one of those corers, the kind I cannot get it down straight. It always goes wonky. I end up wasting a lot of the, you know, good part of the apple or pear. And this comes from someone who, so you mentioned I have a BFA from RIT, from Rochester Institute of Technology. I went to the School for American Craftsmen there. I studied silver and goldsmithing. So I'm a diamond setter by trade, by training. I was a jeweler. I can cut a cheesecake in 13 equal pieces without measuring. Like I have this amazing ability to sort of see space, understand spatial relationships. I can't get an apple core down the so if I can't do it, like you guys are having trouble with it. So what I like to do instead is just cut it in half. And you know, it's got like a seed packet in the center there. And use a melon baller instead to take out just what we need to remove. Like why remove that whole shaft of stuff when really you just need to get the seed packet out. So, and you can do this with apples too, and it'll take out the little kind of hard bit, you know, the little, almost like a little plastic in there around the seed. You just take the biggest end of your, put it right over the seed packet and just kind of press it with your thumb, give it a twist. And now I've removed everything I need to remove. I think that's pretty great. You can, you know, we've still got the stem and there's that little like string that is attached to the stem. So I do cut like a V at that string. I know I just cut the cord in my hands and it made you guys really nervous, I'm sorry. But I'm just cutting like that out. And then there's the blossom end, sort of the same thing. I'm just gonna cut a V and get that out. So that's really, a little deeper. That's really all you need to remove. Everything else is edible. Do that on the second one. And if they're ripe, it's great. But if they're not ripe, it's fine because they're going to bake up. You know, that heat is almost like ripening from the sun. This one doesn't really have anything to remove. Let's do it on this side. So just cut that little V, remove the stem end and the blossom end. You're good. So we're going to just cube these up. Sort of maybe like a 1/2 inch slice. And then I'll flip them on their side. And you notice when I'm cutting, you know, I cut this pear in half and then I put it cut side down. So when you're cutting, try to have things on a flat side so they're not, you know, as opposed to this one, which would be rocking around. You want to put it so that it's flat and not rocking so that it's a little safer, that's all. So now I'm actually like flipping this on another flat side to go the other direction and cut it into cubes. So we're making cubes like 1/2 inch, but you know, nothing fussy. Don't go and recut them if they're a little bigger. And I usually use Bartlett pears, which I think these are. Anjou pears are delicious, but they're very watery. They actually don't have a lot of flavor. They've got a lot of liquid to them. So I don't usually use Anjous. Those are the ones, like if you buy fruit from Harry and David, they're wrapped in gold foil. So funny, one time my brother, so I live on the same street as my brother, and he was out of town for Christmas. So I was sort of in charge of, you know, bringing his garbage cans in after garbage day. And I drove by his house. It was garbage day the day he was leaving. And there was this really nice box on top of his garbage can. Like, that's a nice box. I could use that for something. So I took it instead of letting him throw it out. And about a week later, I opened the box and it had Harry and David pears in it, wrapped in gold foil. It was, and I called him, I'm like, why are you throwing out pears? He's like, I wasn't, that was a gift for the garbage collector. Christmas gift. Sorry. I took them and I ate them. I mean, shouldn't there have been a note or something on there that's saying like Merry Christmas or Justin, my brother's kid. So when we make this cake, it's gonna look a lot like fruit salad with a little cake bundling it together. I don't know if you found that, Amy. Yeah, it seems like it's way too much fruit, and it's like, how is this ever gonna bake up to be a cake? So, and I think it every time I make it, but I'm just warning you, once those pears bake up and that cake, you know, the baking powder sort of does its thing, it turns into cake with fruit versus fruit with cake. Okay, so don't worry. So let's go ahead and just add the wet stuff to this. We're gonna add the milk. And we're just gonna break that yolk, but we're not like even, you know, scramble with butter, but you want a dirtier fork to mix that egg up, right? And the melted butter is going in. This is 4 tablespoons, and then there's 3 tablespoons in the streusel topper. So it's not even a stick of butter. I do use unsalted butter when I'm baking because I want to know how much salt is in my cooking, not just for health reasons, but for flavor reasons. Butter is 82% fat. That's like a government FDA thing here in America. So if a stick of butter is 82% fat, it's 18% other stuff. If that 18% other stuff is from salted butter, it could technically be 18% salt. It's not, don't worry. But like within that 18%, you don't know how much is salt, and they don't really tell you, and that part's not regulated. So I'd rather know how much salt is in there and, you know, have a measurement in my recipe that I'm going for. Salt also is a natural preservative. So theoretically, unsalted butter might be fresher, like they can't keep it on the shelf as long, has a shorter shelf life. What the 18% is like water, milk solids, and then salt and butter. If you've ever clarified butter or just even melted butter, there's like milk in the bottom. That's what that is. The only time that it's different is if it's European style butter, like Poudre or Kerrygold, which I just came back from Ireland, so I'm like pro Kerrygold right now. But that's 84% butter fat. So you're paying like $1 more or more, $1.50 more for 2% more butter fat, which to me is not always worth it. I mean, if you're buying, you know, fun butter for spreading on bread, I get it. But to bake with, don't do it. It'll throw your recipe off. It's not worth it. You know, most recipes, especially people like me who write recipes for home use, do not use European style butter. So they're formulated with just, you know, regular American regulation butter. The other thing that's sort of industry standard when you're a cookbook writer is the size of eggs. So when it says 1 egg, it means 1 large egg. That's the standard now. And when you're writing a cookbook, you'll get like a style sheet from your publisher that says, you know, this is what this means. That 1 egg means 1 large egg. So always use 1 large egg unless you've got an heirloom recipe. So if you have a recipe from your grandma and she, you know, for her sponge cake and it says jumbo eggs, you respect your elders, you use jumbo eggs in that case, okay? Because her recipe was made with that size egg. But if you're just using a cookbook that was written in the last 40 years, let's say, large is the industry standard. So I just added all these pears. We're going to stir this together. It's going to look like fruit salad, like I mentioned, bound together like with a little, you know, it's almost like if you're making, never made ambrosia. No, it scares me. But, you know, you can see it's a really thick batter with, you know, what looks like a lot of fruit. When it bakes up, it actually becomes cake. I'm going to go ahead and place this into our pan that we prepped. I do like to scrape the bowl. Because in my brain, like that's money. I saw you today. Is there something and you scraped it more. What was that?
Some
Trying to remember what we were cooking together.
Yeah, every last bit.
Girl after my own heart. Look at that. So you do have to spread it around a little bit in the pan. It's pretty, solid. We used melted butter, so now that butter, as it gets colder or room temperature, turns to a solid. That's sort of the difference between butter and vegetable oil. Butter, when it sits at room temperature, is a solid. Vegetable oil, when it sits at room temperature, is a liquid. So if you've got a cake that uses vegetable oil instead of butter, it seems moister. That's why you get the sensation of moisture, because it doesn't get solid at room temp, whereas butter does. So I'm just going to go ahead and shear this into the corners as much as I can, and then we're going to make the streusel topping. Now, Amy, she likes to make traditional streusel topping, which this recipe was written that way, where you take some room temperature butter and you kind of pinch it in to the flour and sugar and cinnamon. But then I was at a demo just like this one time, and one of the people in the audience said, is there any reason why you couldn't melt that butter for the streusel and just kind of stir it in? And I thought, I don't know, let's find out. So now I do it that way. So I just take, so for the streusel topping, and this is a streusel topping you can use for anything. So I was in, where was I? I was in Cooperstown, New York a couple weeks ago. I don't know if anybody goes to Cooperstown for a baseball induction, but I do every year for my husband. So I stay with friends there, and the wife and I bake all weekend long. We just cook and bake. And her husband was the mayor of Cooperstown and wrote a couple baseball books. So all these journalists come to their house. So she and I just like cook and put out deviled eggs and go back to the kitchen and something else we just made, put that out and make just like eat. And it's so much fun. And we did a blueberry peach. It's kind of like a press-in shortbread, and then we put all this fruit on top, and then we threw streusel topping on top of that. And it was delicious and fantastic. So she's like, do you know a streusel topping recipe, streusel recipe? I'm like, yeah, I got this one in my repertoire. So I just knocked it together. We've got half a cup of sugar, a teaspoon of cinnamon versus there's a half a teaspoon in there. And then we've got a half a cup of flour. So same amount of flour as sugar. Let's just do a quick stir. Same thing, right? Stir it till the cinnamon isn't streaky anymore. And you could be really wild and crazy and switch out brown sugar for the white sugar. That's always a fun way to make something a little bit more interesting.
Just for the streusel, not for the.
Yeah, just if you wanted to add like a little different flavor. So I'm stirring these together. See, I'm using one spoon. That's like my husband. If you watch my cook, I've written 8 cookbooks, and through the years, I used to have you mise up, floss out everything, mise everything in little bowls and ahead of time. Now it's like one bowl, okay, where you do this and then you pour half out and then finish it in there because of the husband and the dishwasher. I feel so bad for the poor guy. So I'm just stirring this together with the end of the spoon. So it's kind of, it's still going to be sort of bumpy and probably. And then I'm just going to sprinkle this over the top surface. You want to just kind of do it with your hands to break it up. Flip it this way so at least that tongue is not blocking every single view. So I'm teaching a bunch of classes at Amie Academy this week. Thank you for inviting me, first of all. Just thrilled. I've never been to Cape Cod. Neither have my children. I'm such a corn-fed, Midwestern girl. So I feel like I'm in a very exotic place. In my brain, it's like sort of the Kennedy. I'm looking for Kennedy. Ruby's out. So my daughters are 17. She's out looking for a Kennedy. She wants to go to St. Andrews for college to marry a royal, but in the meantime, she would just look for a Kennedy while she's here. So this is a really exciting trip that Midwesterners can't quite figure out how to do. So I appreciate you helping us get a chance. I get to be the mom who took their kids to Cape Cod before they stop traveling with me, before they stop talking to me, right? Because they're seniors in high school. But I've got a class tomorrow. We've got a couple seats left in tomorrow's class. We're doing a Great British Bake Off class, which is not a competition. It's a class sort of like if you've ever fantasized about going into that tent in Great British Bake Off, here's a couple desserts you should have under your belt. Because you know they're going to ask you to make shortbread. So everyone should know how to do that. So a couple desserts that are just probably going to pop up if you were ever thinking about competing, or just, vicariously are competing as, I don't know how much you got. That's what I did during when I had COVID for 5 days. I did 3 seasons of Great British Bake Off. That's what I did. So tomorrow at 4 is the Great British Bake Off class. Got a couple seats left in that. On Saturday, we've got a kids molten chocolate lava class, which is sold out. So can't offer any seats in that one. But that afternoon, Saturday afternoon at 4, we've got a citrus class, a lemon class, where we're doing like the best lemon tart you've ever had in your life, lemon mousse, and a lemon drizzle cake, which is a British cake that you should know if it's not in your repertoire. It keeps great. It's just a wonderful recipe. And then Sunday, we've got a brunch class, but we sold on the Sunday brunch class. So just got a couple seats left in British Bake Off and in the lemon class. And you go to where to sign up to sign up.
Is the lemon cake in the cookbook?
It's not. All 3 recipes that I'm doing at the lemon class have not been in any of my books. They're not published anywhere yet. If you went to my Facebook page, during COVID, I was doing live cooking classes just for free, and then I opened Kitchen Sisters Cooking School as well. I think the lemon drizzle cake is somewhere on my Chef Gale Gand Facebook page if you need it. And then I made it. Is anybody a baseball fan at all? So Big Poppy was inducted. Okay. I was like, I don't want to talk about baseball this morning, but so I made the lemon drizzle cake, but with poppy seeds in honor of Big Poppy. We also made We made a big Dominican lunch. We made empanadas, and so he wasn't at the house or anything. I got to see him talk at a panel discussion, but we were using a lot of poppy seeds that weekend in honor of Big Poppy. Anything else I should mention? Oh, I know there's a fun fact somewhere on the bottom of the poster side. It mentions that I made a peach cobbler for Aretha. I thought I was making a cobbler for 12 people. That's what they ordered. And then it turned out it was all for her. There's a wealthy guy in Chicago named Sam Zell, who owns half of the city. And I think he even owned the Cubs for a while, or Wrigley Field or something. So every other year he would have a birthday party for himself. And he would hire his favorite chefs in the city to do the food. And this is a party for him and his 400 closest friends. Really elaborate party. He had a graphic designer that made special T-shirts that you had to show up in, or you couldn't get into the party. It was always in an undisclosed location. It was like a treasure map. Like you get this invite that said, meet at this corner in Chicago and get on this bus, and the bus would take you to like a boat, and the boat would take you to some barge, and then it'd let you off at some crazy location that he had secretly found. He didn't want press there taking pictures, which is part of why it was so secret. But every other year this party ran, and he'd have crazy entertainment for it. So like one year it was Elton John for his private party. One year it was Bette Midler. And it was always a surprise. Like the guests we knew who it was going to be, but the guests didn't know who the performer was going to be. And one year it was James Brown as the opening act. And we're like, who would James Brown open for? Like, I'm James Brown and you want me to open? And it was Aretha. So so that night it was at the Aragon Ballroom, and it was James Brown did his set, and then Aretha did her set. And when it was like the last 2 songs, she brought out like 100 kids from the south side of Chicago from a choir, like a church choir from the south side. These like 10-year-olds just like flanked the balcony of the club. It's one of these clubs with 2 floors. I can't remember what song she did, but she had these 100 voices of these little gospel singers. It was just moving. So she can have the peach cobbler if that's what it takes. Apparently also, I remember seeing the guy, he was like you know, we have handlers when she is a food handler, like that's all I did. So he like brought a bucket of chicken and went down, and then like 20 minutes later come up and like the bucket of chicken's empty, and that's when the peach cobbler went down. So funny stories, you know, when you're in the restaurant business, you get all kinds of celebrities who have quirky requests. I remember Robin Williams came to True once to my restaurant, and we used to have electronic doors. So like my waiters would be carrying silver trays, you know, with food on it. So they didn't want to like, you know, bump the door with their bottom or, you know, hit it with their elbow. So we had like in grocery stores, like an electric door that opens and had a seeing eye. And Robin Williams was sitting at a table and he noticed like the waiters could just walk up to the door and it would open. And so he got up from his table, he like went up to the door and made it open, and then he backed up and made it close. And he was like sitting there like playing with the kitchen doors. And finally he just walked in the kitchen. And it's, the way the kitchen was set up at True, my pastry window was like the first thing you saw on your right. So he walks in, I look through my pastry window, there's Robin Williams standing there. And he goes to me, I want to be a waiter. What do I do to be a waiter? And I said, well, basically you serve from the right and clear from the left. He's like, okay, give me something to serve. You know, we have like Michelin stars that we don't want to lose. And Robin Williams once, I'm like, okay, you're going to table 15. And you know, you always serve the lady first. Here's her dessert and here's the guy's dessert. And what I knew, table 15 was another chef from Chicago who had come to check us out. It was Michael Taus, from Chicago, from Zealous. He was there, like checking us out for the first time, and I'm like, I'm gonna mess with him. So I sent Robin Williams with the 2 desserts to his table, and he served it. I just love sort of thinking about like, okay, Chef Michael's gonna go to his restaurant tomorrow. And, you know, at pre-shift meeting, he's gonna go, you guys, I went to True last night for dinner. You'll never believe who they have as a waiter. I just kind of love that idea. So he was fun. Any questions about what we did here? We're gonna bake it at 400, but yes.
When you were talking about the streusel, what's the advantage and disadvantage of people who put oatmeal in their streusel?
I don't know that's an advantage, but I think it's just like a textural difference. Makes it a little more interesting, but it is really popular lately to do oatmeal in toppings and crumble toppings and streusel toppings. Do you have an answer for that, Amy, of what, like, why do we do that, or why is that being done?
I think the texture is the right answer.
Okay. Maybe health makes it healthier.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good answer.
Well, kind of, you know, it
Yeah.
does a little.
I use oatmeal in my streusel.
Do you?
Yeah.
So do you like the bigger texture?
I do, I like it.
And do you use rolled oats or quick cooking or instant? Because those are sort of the
Not
three.
instant, just the quick cooking.
Quick cooking, okay, because they're a little more tender. Rolled oats have been, you know, rolled between rollers. I think quick cooking have been steamed and then rolled, so some of the fibers are a little more broken down. So I think that's why it was just, you know, we're always, as Americans especially, we're always messing with stuff, you know, it's bad rules. I worked in England for 3 years in the 90s, and that's when I learned how very untamed we are as Americans. You know, if their dad was a gardener, they're a gardener. Like, they are rule followers, they queue, you know, they're very polite. We're just like, we don't listen to anybody, yeah, and we're just always like messing with tradition and like, oh, who cares if for 16 generations it's been done that way? Let's try oatmeal in our streusel. So I think it's just like our nature as Americans to kind of experiment. Yeah.
I thought I heard you say for the streusel, it was equal half cup sugar, half cup
Oh, is it,
flour.
yeah, is it?
It says 1/4 cup flour.
Okay. It's
And
not
half
equal.
cup
So
sugar.
1/2 cup sugar, 1/4 cup flour.
Okay.
You're right.
Also, do you have an opinion about weighing ingredients versus measuring?
You know, we talk a little bit about that. I've been writing cookbooks for 20 years. 95 was my first one. You know, no one had a scale back then, and I've been writing them for you guys, you know, for domestic cooks. And so always used measuring spoons, measuring cups. I teach almost every fall, you know, everything, when COVID happened, everything changed, but for maybe falls in a row. I taught at King Arthur's Educational Center in Vermont. And for the first 6 of those 8 years, I would just send my recipes with measurements. And year 7, they said, can you send it with not only weight, they wanted, regular cups and tablespoons, but they wanted grams.
Grams, right.
And I'm like, what's going on? Because nobody's got a scale. And they're like, oh, we have scales for sale. I'm like, oh, okay. So I don't know about you. I was in kindergarten in the 60s and they said we were going metric. So we had to learn it, right? I've been waiting 60 years for this.
Right.
I think it might be happening finally. So in the baking world, and maybe some of it has to do with just the great interest in professional chefs and restaurants. People, want to cook like a chef, and part of what you do is you weigh your ingredients. So weighing is more accurate. It's what we do in professional kitchens. It's just, we didn't think you guys wanted to do it, but apparently now it's starting to trickle in. And King Arthur will sell you a scale. They've got, 8 different models in the showroom there. And when I'm teaching, we're sort of straddling both right now. So I bet in 10 more years.
I've started in COVID, baking with weighing. And now if I get a recipe like this, I'm like, oh, I don't know.
Really?
I'm not
So you're
sure.
You retrain, this feels like a little loose to you.
Yeah.
And it was funny when I first went to King Arthur, you go there, you're doing a class with 40 people and they pre-measure out the mise en place for everybody. So I had a little assistant who her job was to help me use everything out. And she said to me, Chef Gale, how do you measure your flour? And I said, and I thought like, I don't know what she means. I got James Beard Awards. I'm like, well, how do you measure your flour? Like I start back at her and she's, oh, we fluff, scoop, and swipe. So I'm like, oh, that's what we're talking about. So I don't fluff, and I have to remember that when I would go to King Arthur because stuff would come out like too light. I just kind of scoop and swipe. But it takes away, and we actually did a comparison. We did a fluff scoop and swipe and a just scoop and swipe. It was about a ½ ounce difference.
Yeah.
So that's that nervous, that's why you're feeling nervous. It's for real, it's for a reason.
Yes.
In May, I went to Poland and Ukraine to cook with World Central Kitchen. I don't know if you guys have heard on the news about Jose Andreas, who's been a friend of mine for 20 years. 12 years ago, he started running towards disaster instead of away and running into disaster situations and feeding people to help them recover, restore, rebuild, and just nourish them. So you've probably heard of these guy kitchens in Ukraine and Poland. And I went for a couple of weeks to cook there. And before I went, I said, should I bring should I bring my recipe? Should I bring measuring cups and spoons? They're like, no, we have everything here. Famous last words, right? And I get there. The smallest thing, I wouldn't even call it a measuring cup, but the smallest container with lines on it that said anything was a 5-liter pitcher, like a plastic 5-liter pitcher. That's what I measured. And and I walk in, they're like, we need chocolate cake. I'm like, okay, how many do we need? They're like 5,000 pieces. I'm like, okay. So I'm multiplying recipes by 120 times. And it turned out it's like 2 cups of baking soda. And I don't even have a cup measure. And you have to be resourceful when you're cooking in a war zone. I go to the coffee station. They've got a place where you can make coffee tea. And there's a cardboard box and it says 8-ounce coffee cups. And so I had a paper cup that I knew was 8 ounces. So that was a 1-cup measure. That's what I can do. But when you go there, the flour is in kilo bags, sugar's in kilo bags, butter's in pounds. So it's you're speaking many languages when you're in that kitchen making those 5,000 portions. We were serving 20,000 meals a day. So this was tiny. Yes.
And isn't liquid measure different than dry measure?
Yes, it is. That's another part of this whole scenario. So liquid measuring cup, which would be like the glass one with lines and the pour spout, is different than a dry measure that you can swipe. So the deal with liquid measuring is liquids are not flat across the top. They're meniscus. the meniscus this way or this way. You've overfilled a cup. And so those lines are supposedly put at the spot to compensate for the fact that it's not there. And maybe the first 20 years of baking, I ignored that. I didn't think it mattered. And then I met with like a scientist one day and I'm like, oh yeah, that matters. So no, I am careful to use it. But in, you know, in Poland, we didn't have either. So it didn't really matter. The 20,000 meals, we would do about 10,000 sandwiches a day. So volunteers who didn't have culinary experience like I do were on the sandwich line. And then people like me, or you know, who had some cooking experience, were making hot food. We cooked in, I don't know if you've seen them on the news, there are these big paella pans that look like a baby pool. And the spoon we use looks like a canoe oar. It was, and the ovens are like closets. We had 10 of them along a wall. It's like a vault that you open up and roll like a whole rack of pans into. So I could bake off like 20 steam table pans at a time on cake. It was quite an experience. And, you know, not even mentioning the emotional part of it and helping people across the border. I went there for Mother's Day. I made sure I was there on Mother's Day because Ukraine has the same Mother's Day as us. And I thought, you know, I've had a lot of nice Mother's Days. I can sacrifice one of mine to make theirs a little bit better. So we made special cookies for Mother's Day, 7,000 of them, and gave out flowers. Any other questions before we sign books? Yeah.
How do people sift their flour?
So sifting is sort of a thing more of my mother's era because original, you know, in the 50s and 60s, we didn't have humidity controlled environments where flour was milled. Nowadays, we have special bags that are kind of airtight or humidity resistant. We have sell by dates, we have use by dates. So there's a lot of things in place now that keep bugs. I don't know if you're, do you remember when we were little and we'd like sift and there'd be like a worm in your flour? Like you were looking for stuff. Yeah, there'd be like moths. There'd be eggs that would laid in there and they would hatch. So a lot of the reasons why we sifted flour are gone now. The only time I sift flour, though, ask if you ever do, is with angel food cake, which my recipe tells you to like sift it 3 times with half of the sugar. So I'm still doing it with angel food cake, and I've done it. I've made a cake without the sifting, and it is a little denser. So that's the only time I'll bother to do it. Otherwise, I'm not sifting anymore. But are you in anything?
Yeah. Okay.
Angel food, anything else that you can think of?
Macaroons.
Yeah, and but are you? Is that almond flour, and you get the big bits out? Yeah, so that's like for ground almonds, almond flour will sift because sometimes there's like a big piece.
I will say here on Cape, the confectionery sugar is the lumpiest I've ever
Oh,
seen in
and
my
powdered
life.
sugar
So
sometimes.
you kind of have, I mean, we have to sift it at the bakery.
Good point. Yeah, powdered sugar,
But it's
especially
just
if you're making
here on
icing.
Cape, like, it's so humid here, it's a different
Where-
environment here.
I was saying to Amy today, I was making some meringues for class tomorrow. And we were talking about whether to wrap them after they're done. And I said, you know, if I was in Hawaii, which I cook at the Hawaii Food and Wine Festival every year, if I was in Hawaii, I would definitely wrap them because that's an island surrounded by water.
Yeah.
But I'm on Cape Cod. I'm like, wait, that's kind of an island surrounded by water in a way. So that
It's
was,
humid here.
is it? That's what I was
Very different
anticipating.
than just 5 hours from here.
Right.
It's so different.
Right, so that's the sifting. Yeah.
So my last one, sorry,
Oh.
one more. Is there a big difference between, like, I go shopping for flour, sugar, butter, and you have your store brands and you have your
King Arthur.
or your,
Yeah, no, I
is there a
know.
difference?
So I asked myself the same question. I was cooking for a few years at an organic historic farm outside of Chicago. It's called Eloa Farm, and I teach there every month. And when I got the job as chef in residence there was a pallet of King Arthur flour from the previous chef. And I thought, you know, I've never really used this stuff because it's so expensive, but I've got a whole palette of it to work through to figure out like what's so special about it, what's so what, because people are devoted to it. So I cooked the whole summer, cooked through that palette of flour, and still kind of felt like I couldn't tell you what the difference was. So I called King Arthur. That's why I started teaching. I called King Arthur and I'm like, you know, can you explain like what the difference is? And they said, you know what, we'd love to. Why don't you come up and we'll show you, and can you teach while you're here? So that was how that whole thing started. So I go up to King Arthur, and what I learned there, as they're showing me how their flour's milled, and they're employee owned, it's a terrific company. When they shop for wheat to make flour out of, they have very specific specifications. So flour has protein in it. And you'll even see on the bag, it might say like 11.5% protein. They'll say that, I think, on the all-purpose. So their specification, they will only buy wheat that has 11.475% protein to 11.525% protein. So like a 0.5 variation, as opposed to a store brand, which will accept 11% to 13% protein. Somewhere in there is fine. So that's the difference. The difference is that King Arthur flour is more consistent. So you're not going to get a variation of amount of protein in the flour. It's a very narrow specification that they're willing to buy and put in their bag. That's what I've been able to find out is the difference. So stuff is more, your recipes come out more consistent, more the same each time. I don't know if you've ever like bought a new bag of flour and suddenly like, huh, that's different than last time I made it. That might be part of why. So that's what I understand the difference. Is that worth $2 extra a bit?
No.
I'm not sure. Get it on sale and like, we had one question back there. And then I'll
Yes,
get to it.
about cake flour.
Uh-huh.
Do you use cake flour?
I do, but again, it's only specific recipes that call for it. So it's got a lower protein content. I think is cake flour like 9% protein. So it's a softer flour. And the one that I don't really use is pastry flour, which I think is that in between?
We just bought
Cake
that.
and
I don't
pastry
even know
flour.
what it is.
I don't either. What
I'm
is
like,
that?
What is this? I have no
Yeah,
idea.
they use it in schools a lot, like in culinary schools.
Right,
And I'm just,
right.
I mean, I've only been baking 40 years, but I don't know what
So
it is.
weird, I don't know what it is.
I think it's
I-
like a combo kind of, or it's
Yeah.
like 10%. But so cake
Yeah.
flour is 9%. Can you guys just go out and buy a box of cake flour? Because I'm so afraid they're gonna stop making it. And it's not gonna be, I'm gonna go to the store one day and it's gonna be like gone because nobody bought it. So just, can you just like buy a box, even if you just throw it out, just buy some, just so like it's gonna be there when I need it.
I like it.
All right, I do. I think, and I actually think I use cake flour in my angel food cake. Yeah, I do. I've got like a
Pound
few
cake.
recipes. What was your question?
Oh, you answered it. I was gonna ask if you made the change to King Arthur or not.
Only when it's on sale. Isn't that pitiful? Like, it's what I do for a living, and yet I still, I do use unbleached flour always, because I feel like we don't need any more bleach in our water system. And I believe there might be a little more nutrition, health food, Michigan, in flour that's unbleached versus bleached. But no, I only, sometimes Woodman's will have it, like, they'll have stuff that's near the date, or something, and it'll get marked down, and I'll buy 10 of them. But no, and you think they'd give me a lifetime supply, just, I did some recipe work there's a milk company in Chicago called Oberweis, and it's, they're like hormone free. It's not organic, but it's sort of like next best thing. And they needed some recipes, and they really couldn't afford my fees. And I was like, well, how about we do a trade? Like, we could barter. They're like, yes, we'll give you milk delivery at your home free for a year. I'm like, that's great. How great. And it's like in glass bottles, and it's really good milk. So we do the deal, and I'm on like WGN with the recipes on TV. They're delivering milk to my house for a year, 2 years. 3 years, but like after about 5 years, someone calls and says, Chef Gand, I'm like, I know why you're calling. It's okay. They're like, we're so sorry, but we're gonna have to start charging you for the milk. So I got like 5 free years, which was great. And then I started paying for it. I was like, no way am I paying that. Like, it's too expensive. But yeah, you'd think King Arthur would like send me. I get stuff, like I'll work for Kraft and I get Blue Box, cases of Blue Box and stuff like that, which I give to my friends. Any other questions? I want to thank you for coming out tonight. I know it's sort of dinner time and we didn't really make dinner, though we do have something for them to try.
Dessert first, yes.
Yeah, so
And
this
show
is
the
what the
final.
cake, yeah, this is what it looks like baked off. So it's a nice little, you know, crumbly topping on top. And then you can just cut it into squares like the, you know, it has the pictures on it. And just serve it. And I think we've got tastes for you guys. And that's why you're so patient sitting here, right? Good things that tastes are involved.
So I